Episode 66, STEM in Flight with Jill Meyers.
The female director of HR looked at me after she did some research and said, yes, you make about 40,000 less than the men, and we're not doing anything about it. But if we're half the population and you don't have anything close to that, you're not going to get the diversity of ideas. It's really about the diversity of ideas because men and women do not normally think the same, and that's been proven.
Welcome, fellow STEM enthusiasts, to the STEM Southwest podcast, your source for all things science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This podcast is designed to create STEM connections, cohesion, and elevation. This is a place where STEM enthusiasts gather to learn about some amazing STEM rock stars and activities of the Southwest and beyond that are impacting the world. If you have longed to be united with your fellow STEM nerds, then you've found your people here at STEM Southwest. And now, here are your hosts, Bob and Shelley.
So, Shelley, we are on this trend of having high-flying women on our podcast.
Yes, we are.
And why? What do you think mean by high-flying women?
I don't know, Bob. You want to explain to our listeners and viewers?
Yes. So we had Day Hockman-Vigil, our last guest, who is a certified aviation and space attorney, but also is a pilot.
Yes.
And grew to love piloting when she was very young in her father's lab. Mm-hmm. Today's guest, Jill Meyers, kind of a similar story. She developed a love of flying when she was really young.
She did.
And she is a pilot as well, among other things.
Yes.
I mean, she's got a very interesting story, one that I found pretty exciting. And so it was a really good interview.
Absolutely. I love the piece of the story where she talks about, as a 12-year-old girl, how she shows up at her small local airport and heads turn. Mostly older men there, right? And she persevered. They didn't necessarily want her there, but she just kept working at it. And it was kind of from a young age in her heart that that's what she wanted to do.
Right, but she also was there as somebody that couldn't even get a license until she was age 17. She was ready to do anything she could. I believe she was 12 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Showing up at the airport. It's like, well, you're too young, go away. But of course, she never went away.
Yeah.
The other part of her story, well, we hear about is, so she's involved with Women in Aviation, has been a member for a number of years, has been a chapter president of 2 chapters, and showed up here in Albuquerque, where there's a lot of representation of aviation. And
aeronautics. Like so much happening.
But would you believe it? There was no chapter here. So what did she do? She just sat on the sideline?
No.
Heck no.
No, that's not Jill.
And she has made a lot happen in 1 year's time, which
has.
Our audience will hear in the podcast.
Absolutely. Well, so one fun thing that's happened since we interviewed her, I had the opportunity to watch her on an online panel discussion this week with the International Association of Women in Aviation. And it was women on the panel from all over the globe. So a woman representing Africa, India, just all over the place. And it was really interesting. They covered a lot of topics, but what resonated with me in my heart was mentoring, of course. You know, I think that that's so important, and we talked with Jill about that. And I love how she shares in her story that you can have unintended mentoring moments. Like, a mentoring relationship doesn't have to be something huge. It can be something very small that happens in a very short period of time, but impacts a young woman or even a professional woman who's been in the field for many years, impacts her growth. And so she talked about that in this panel that I watched this week.
When I think about mentoring can be very purposeful, where you go out and find somebody that is where you want to go, or it could be organic, somebody that just happens to be a part of your life. You start to watch how they conduct their life and may lead you to some major learning through
Yeah.
mentorship. So
Yeah. I feel like as a woman, I have had the blessing of having lots of mentors, women that have mentored me to be a better mom, to be a better homeschool mom, to be a better businesswoman, men that have mentored me in capacities of being a better business leader. So I'm curious, as a man, what about you in mentoring? Because I've heard something a long time ago that women tend to have between 5 and 8 mentors, where men may just focus on fewer than that, like just really get laser focused. What do you think about that?
gosh, it's a broad question. I mean, mentoring, my own approach, I tend to laser focus on a few because of particular area that I'm interested in. And so I've had mentors throughout my life on various topics. But I've heard a couple of folks talk about this as well, but would you believe it? I listen to a lot of podcasts, I read a lot of books, and a lot of those individuals are actually mentors to me, because
Right.
sometimes in your day-to-day life, you necessarily not getting the encouragement, the focus you would really need, and I just go to those podcasts or that book and I get re-energized and get where I was lost maybe for a moment, and I just get focused again. So I don't think
That's good.
I don't think we
That's a
forget
good
that.
thing for us to remember. So speaking of mentoring, we are getting ready at Be Greater Than Average to release our spring and summer calendar. I'm super excited because, of course, you know that the entire program is based on peer mentoring. And it's such a beautiful thing to see students mentoring other students. And just recently, we had someone come to our center, and I had students working there, building robots and working together. And after this person kind of toured the facility, she came and shared with me that she was really impressed how students were like working together and encouraging each other and helping solve problems. And she just saw that walking through. But what a difference a mentor can make. I think about like when I was in high school or elementary school, like how you look up to other students that are older than you. And that's an important part of leadership development. So I just want to encourage everybody to go sign your kids up for a camp or gift a camp to other kids that you know or grandkids that you know, because you want to be working on their leadership. And the beautiful thing is the schedule is going to come out and people are going to see we're going to do some in person, but we also have plenty online as well. So people can access us literally from all over the globe. And that's really exciting to me.
Agreed. I think with the changing environment, there are less cases of COVID, more people getting the vaccine. It's going to be a new dynamic because you develop the online approach for learning, and there are people that are yearning to get back in person. So it's going to be an interesting hybrid approach, and I think it'll be successful. In fact, I know it will be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one last thing. One of the other speakers on the panel said something about mentoring that I was just really touched by, and then we'll let our audience listen to what Jill has to say in her exciting story. But this woman, her name is Rosalind Azuzi, and she shared a little quote she just shared something, and I like wrote it down here on paper. It says, what she was saying is that mentoring is the solution to maintain. And what she meant by that, mentoring young women, and they went on to discuss this further, but I just grabbed that little quote. But the whole point of it was that to keep our young daughters and our sons interested and invested in STEM and in aviation and in doing these difficult things, that they need mentors. And so I guess today I'm putting out the call, like, are you standing up to be a mentor? And I think sometimes people are like, oh, it'll take too much time, or oh, I don't know enough to be a mentor yet.
Exactly.
Right? But the reality is the world is waiting on you. Like, you have a piece of someone's future, in your mind from your experiences. And so I'm just encouraging people, get out there and become an audacious mentor. Do it in a moment, do it in a whole series of moments, but just go out and, like Nike says, just do it.
Yeah, I was thinking even my father, who I consider one of my best mentors in life, he would share occasional words of wisdom, but for me, it was more or less about observation, what he did.
Right.
And so you may not have any words of wisdom. You may think you don't, you may not have words of wisdom you may not feel you can share, but how you conduct yourself, how you show your character integrity, that will go a long way to affect a person's life.
So without further ado, let's share this episode.
So Shelley, I'm really excited about today's interview. If you recall, we had Day Hockman-Vigil, our last guest, who, among other things, is an aviation attorney. And it really segues well with our current guest today, Jill Meyers. She's got what I would consider a dream life. She's taken her career and made it a life that a lot of us would love to live. And so, Jill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invite. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so excited because I have had many conversations with Jill and know she's got way more amazing stories that we probably won't be able to pack this whole hour with, but we're going to try. Let's dive in or take off, depending on how you want to look at it.
So how about a little less speaking from us? Jill, most of our audience, I'm going to assume they don't know who you are. So why don't you give us a lowdown? Tell us about your background, your STEM background, and we'll leave it to you.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you both for having me on. This is so exciting. When I first moved to Albuquerque, the second time actually I've lived here, but when I moved here 2 years ago now, and I saw a small business card of you guys somewhere, and I'm like, wow, this is a STEM podcast in Albuquerque. This is incredible. So thank you so much for having me on, because I think you're the only STEM podcast I know of. So about me, it is really long. I'll try to make it short. I'll start chronologically. I've been in aviation really my whole life. It started when I was 12, and we were on vacation north of Boston at a friend of my dad's. We used to go up there every summer. And this friend of my dad's was an inventor and an amazing, amazing human being. And one day, and he was a pilot, and one day he said to us, so Jill, let's today go out in our sailboat and also go up in my airplane. So we did both, and I must say I really hated the sailboat. And that 1 hour in the airplane with him, he had a small aircraft called a Cessna 140, and we went up for an hour. I was, again, 12 years old, completely enamored, sold. It was like, okay, that's it. So at the time we lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I could ride my bike to the small airport there. So I started riding my bike to the airport after school and on weekends, and just wanted to be around airplanes. It was just so exciting to me. And of course I went in and offered to, like, can they hire me? I'll sweep the floors, whatever. And they just said, you're 12, like, go home. So I did go home, but I still hung out there a lot, and ended up getting my pilot's license at the earliest possible legal age you can, which is 17. So I got my pilot's license the middle of my senior year of high school, and then found out about the military. I didn't know much about it, but I found an Air Force brochure and thought it was amazing. So I walked in with my pilot's license in my hand to join the Air Force, and I got yeah, but you're a girl and we don't do that quite yet. So I couldn't fly with the military. This was in the 70s. But I joined anyway. So I spent 8 years in the Air Force working on ground radar and communication systems all over the world. It was an amazing time. And while I was I was asked to apply to a program. Let me back up. I had started college, quit, and then joined the Air Force, the little piece most people don't know about. And I don't ask anyone to follow my path of starting college and quitting. But I joined the military, and then I continued taking night classes as soon as I got to my first permanent assignment. So at one point, the Air Force approached me and said, hey, you'll never finish this degree doing one class at a time. Because of course I was working 24-hour operations kind of jobs. So they asked me to apply to a very special program. This is the middle of the 1980s, where I was accepted as one of only 5 people in the world to get my astronautical engineering degree, courtesy of the Air Force. So I went back to the University of Texas in Austin, full time as an active duty Air Force member, which is why the program was rare and not advertised much. And got my degree in aerospace engineering and continued in the Air Force for another year or two. It's a long story why I got out, but I got out and ended up doing the next 25 years in aerospace engineering. You know, started as a hands-on engineer, so to speak, and got into management pretty quickly in my career. About the year 2001 is when I first was handed an organization of a lot of amazing people to manage. That was at Raytheon. But I've done Boeing, I've done Raytheon, I've done Northrop Grumman, the three biggies. Worked for GE Aerospace very long ago before they became part of Lockheed Martin. And then in early 2017, I was asked to join a nonprofit as an unpaid volunteer full time. So another super long story I'm not sure we'll have time for, but as a young Afghan refugee named Shasta Ways, who flew around the world solo in 2017 to do nothing but hold outreach events all over the world to inspire young kids, mostly girls, to be brave and follow their dreams. So most of 2017, I actually worked for her full time with no salary, helping her with the logistics of her flight and also planning all the outreach events around the world. And then when that was over, I managed her speaking career for a while and then needed an income again. And of course, all that was sort of done. So I started a consulting business in the spring of 2018, which is what brought me here. And I've been consulting full time since 2018. And what I try to do is support only organizations, it sounds corny, but you know, trying to save the world in some way, very specific as to who I help. So I've had probably 6 or 8 clients since 2018 and came here to Albuquerque, moved here almost exactly 2 years ago to help an entrepreneur who I met in 2018 who came to me and said, I want to start an airline. Will you help me? So I was
pretty audacious goal.
Yes. So again, I have a lot of long stories that I'm going to make short, but this entrepreneur, you probably know of him, Shelley, or know him, named Stuart Rose.
We actually have interviewed Stuart Rose on a previous episode.
Oh,
so
how
yes.
Fabulous. He's an amazing human being.
Yes.
Stuart, as well as many other business folks in New Mexico, are super, super, super frustrated that you cannot fly from Albuquerque Sunport to a non-hub airport without changing planes. So you can't get to Tucson without going through Phoenix. You can't get to Amarillo without going through Dallas, et cetera, et cetera. So I spent literally every day of 2 years, starting in June of 2018 until we shut down July 1st of last year, sadly, trying to start this airline company that we were calling Fat Pipe Air, named after his Fat Pipe co-working space downtown. And what was really sad about it is we had an amazing concept of this point-to-point. In the aviation industry, it tends to be called air taxi service. A lot of people have tried to get air taxi service going for a long time. It's probably been in people's minds for 15 years or so, because the airlines can only operate with a hub system or they go out of business, unfortunately. So we had an amazing team that I built, including Dayhawkwood Vigil, who I hired as my regulatory FAA attorney, which is how I met her almost 3 years ago now. And we were on a really good path. We had launch customers lined up, but we just couldn't get any funding. And right about the time we were really ready to really go after investors is when COVID-19 showed up. So since COVID-19 has devastated the aviation industry, honestly, more than any other, despite what people think, it just really took the few investors we had interested away because they were more concerned, especially when the stock market crashed at the same time last spring. They were all more concerned about keeping their existing businesses going. So we ended up shutting down Fat Pipe Air July 1st, sadly, and now I'm on to new and exciting customers and just keep looking forward. So,
okay, there's a lot to unpack there. However, I just have to go in my mind as you're saying that, you know, you got your pilot's license at age 17. I couldn't help but think, like, what was that conversation between you and your dad? Like, hey, Dad, could I borrow the keys to the airplane tonight? Anyway, so you've had so much grit and perseverance and I just love that piece of your story about how you just kept building and building and building on it. A lot of people talk about their consultants. What does that even look like or mean? because it's important for us to talk about careers in STEM and what
Yeah.
kids could look forward to or plan for. You've got something else you want
I
to
want
say?
to preface
before?
that first. It's like you had this really storied career. You worked with Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. Why didn't you take the easy path, go back to one of those and play it safe and collect that paycheck versus just becoming consultant? What was in your mindset when you decided to go down the consultant road?
It's a fabulous question. There were really two factors to that decision process. The first was, after you help a young Afghan refugee fly solo around the world and inspire 3,000 kids, mostly in underprivileged countries, you can't just go back to a day job,
Right.
After Shasta's flight was over, I'll never forget, she and I had to almost immediately go to the largest business aviation conference in the country, literally like 2 weeks, 3 weeks after her flight ended, October 2017. And she and I were sitting in a restaurant all by ourselves. They kind of cleared the restaurant and we had the back of the restaurant to ourselves. And we were talking for like 3 hours. And I remember looking at her and she and I both saying, well, what do we do now? Like, you can't top this. Like, what next? And we both struggled for quite a while about what next. And even after moving to Albuquerque and knowing that I was coming here with a startup entrepreneur company that was likely not to succeed, because most of them don't, especially in aviation, I knew there was a lot of aerospace here. I mean, almost every aerospace company in the country has an office here, even if it's tiny. So I could have so easily called Sandia or, Raytheon here or Boeing or anyone, and I probably could have gotten a job here in 5 minutes doing what I did before, Bob. But I just really wanted to focus my career on helping the people I wanted to help and not being stuck in a corporate structure, because it's tough. I will also say that being a woman in aerospace engineering, in the aerospace defense industry in particular, is extremely difficult. It is still a very much, pardon my comment, but it's a white man's world. It's still an older white man's world. I'll just give you one example. My last official aerospace engineering job was at Northrop Grumman. I was in San Diego, where I lived 5 years before moving here. And I was hired to work on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, the most advanced aircraft ever built in the history of aircraft. 14 countries have made purchases. It's going to replace the F-14, the F-15, the F-16, the F-18, the Harrier, because there's a vertical lift version. It's an incredible program that anyone would kill to be on. And I had a super senior management position on this program, in charge of, I was one of two managers in charge of all the communications and navigation equipment that goes on this airplane. And most people, would kill for that job. But when I was hired, day two, not making this up, day two of my job, this was in 2015, day two of my job, my boss had a staff meeting. And as people started walking in, I was sort of shocked at the demographics. So I started, making little tick marks in my notebook. And the staff meeting, it was an extended staff meeting. So my boss's immediate direct reports, and then other folks that were dotted line to him, as they called it. And the meeting ended up to be 21 white guys and me. And I walked out afterwards and I talked to his executive assistant, who's an amazing woman I'm still friends with. And I said, what was that just now? Then she said, oh, he's been here 30 years. He's never hired a woman manager ever. You're the first. So that wasn't a problem. That's not an issue for me. I've been the only female in many of my either university classes or jobs.
Absolutely.
But the horrifying thing was, because by the way, women are about 13% of aerospace engineering as a percentage right now. 6% of all pilots. We can talk about that too. But I later found out about 5 months into my job that I made $40,000 less a year than my male counterparts. And I had more experience than most of them. And I was hired from the outside. They specifically looked at me in my last panel interview and said, we have a lot of internal candidates, Jill, but we love the fact that you have a different way of thinking than we all do, because we've all been in Northrop Grumman for 30 years. And when I went to human resources director, who was a woman in a part of Northrop Grumman that was run by a woman who's now CEO of the entire corporation. She was president of our division at the time. the female director of HR looked at me after she did some research and said, yes, you make about 40,000 less than the men, and we're not doing anything about it. Another reason I decided not to go back to that world. The equity is not there. The equity is not there in aerospace in opportunities. It is not there in salary for sure. And after a while at Northrop, I actually found two other women who were similar years of experience to me, and the three of us would just go to lunch together or go sit in one of our offices and shut the door and really try to strategize how to get out of the positions we were in, because both of them had been at Northrop most of their careers and had been overlooked for promotions again and again and again. So all that long answer to say, my decision to go into consulting was partly because it was the aerospace industry was a world I really did not want to go back to, because it's super, super challenging. Even though the jobs you can have and the work you can do is more fun than I can possibly describe. But I really wanted to focus on helping multiple clients at once have the flexibility of schedule to come and go as I please, to go to a doctor's appointment without having to tell anybody. And I knew it was definitely a challenge financially, as you mentioned earlier. There's stability in going back to the world I was in before. And I took the leap and decided, and a really good friend of mine who's been in aviation her whole life as well, who owns her own aviation marketing company, I called her for advice when I started. And she said to me, my advice is just do it and say yes to everything and you'll figure it out. I was like, okay. And I took that advice to heart and I did it. So here I am right now with one kind of full-time direct job, one part-time direct job, and two consulting clients as of this week. So I have overextended, but I don't sleep much, so it's going okay so far.
Well, you're willing to hustle and make it happen, right? And that is kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that this country was built on. And the reality is, Bob and I have interviewed a lot of women in STEM, and we hear these stories. We know that there's still so much inequity. We have our own daughters in STEM, and we're just really well aware of that. And let's just be really clear, like, it's okay that there are men in STEM and out there, but I think that we need to somehow do a better job at coming together and lifting each other up and sharing ideas and working together so that all ships can rise, right?
Definitely. And a lot of people have said to me over the years, why does it matter? Why does it matter that only 13% of women in aerospace engineering or of aerospace engineers are women? Does it matter that only 3% of CEOs in aviation are women? And my answer is always, it's nothing against the guys. It's really not. But if we're half the population and you don't have anything close to that, you're not going to get the diversity of ideas. It's really about the diversity of ideas, because men and women do not normally think the same, and that's been proven. So, to me, it's not just about numbers and it's not just about the unfairness of it. It's that it's been proven over and over again by studies that companies and nonprofits come out with better solutions to things if there is diversity of thought, whether that's different genders, different age groups, different ethnic backgrounds, whatever. And that's really what it's all about. And it's hard to get people to understand that sometimes.
Right. That we need that diversity. That diversity leads to continued innovation. And I do think that a lot of our government and government contractors, they are challenged in that way. Let's face it, like that's not unusual. Those percentages are not unusual when we look at government and contractors of the government in that way. I think we've had several interviews of people that are trying to make a difference in that way, and with innovation and utilizing small business and growing that. But definitely something that we need to think about. I love, though, how empowering that you were empowered at 12 years old to go get your license to fly an airplane. I want to talk a little bit about that and girls in flight, if we could. You talk about only 6% of pilots are women. But also, I know that you started, along with moving here, you started something that kind of is a passion project of yours, so
Yes.
that more young women could have this opportunity that you had at age 12 of getting introduced to
Yes.
flight. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I will. Well, first to go back to my getting my license. So, there's this whole notion of once you find your passion, you're sort of set for life kind of a thing work-wise. And, for me, it really did work that way. And that first flight in that Cessna 140 when I was 12 was just so freeing to me and so invigorating. And it's really hard to describe what it felt like. And when I decided to start flight training, which I did the summer right after I turned 17, you can solo at 16, but you can't get your private pilot certificate until you're 17. So I just waited till I turned 17 just to make it easier. And I'll never forget the day I soloed. And what was so funny is to get your private pilot's license, you have to do 3 what's called cross country flights. So first of all, like an idiot, I started flight training in Arizona in the summer when it's 118 degrees every day. So, and my high school, once I started school again in August, my first class of the day in high school started at 7:30 in the morning. So I had to do what they call wheels up. I had to fly at 5 a.m. to be able to do a flight before it got hot and before I had to go to school. So I would often fly during the week at 5 in the morning or on weekends, and then you have to do night flights and stuff. But what was so funny is you have to do 3 what's called cross country flights, which are flights where each leg from city to city has to be a certain length, and they get longer as you get through the training so that you can go out and fly to airports you're not familiar with yet, learn how to do that. But what was so funny is here I was a senior in high school taking, every single advanced placement class. I had a ridiculous schedule. I was pre-med at the time because I thought I wanted to be a doctor, which is another whole long story. And there's a point to that, which I'll get to in a second as well, why my goal wasn't to be a pilot when I was a teenager. But I remember I had to cut school to do these cross-country flights, and everyone knew it, and the teachers knew it, and they would actually go out and look for me in the sky when they knew I was taking off, on the days I was cutting school. It was hilarious. But I did actually get my check ride done in December of my senior year, and I'll just never forget the first time I soloed. I had an amazing flight instructor named John P. Campbell, who I'm still in touch with all these years later. He found me. We weren't in touch for 30 years, and he found me about 2 years ago. He found my website, my business website, and he's like, "Is this the same Jill Meyers?" And he's flown for American Airlines his whole career. It's amazing being back in touch with him. But John was a very insightful and intuitive pilot at the time, and he was only about 5 years older than me, I think, maybe 6 years older than me. And he knew that I got kind of lackadaisical sometimes when I was flying because some of the procedures are very rote and I get bored really easily. So the day that usually when you solo, your instructor will let you know ahead of time so you can prepare mentally and you can get all excited and get all, educated for it. So what John did is we were up doing loops in the pattern one day, and he's like, the next one, just go ahead and pull over. I'm like, all right. So I land, I pull over. He jumps out of the airplane. He's like, okay, do 3 more on your own. He slams the door and he runs away. And I'm like, oh my God. And there was a plane behind me. So I didn't have time to think about it, which made it a better flight for me. But I'll never forget once I got into the longer leg of the pattern, as we call it, and could sit and think for a minute. I remember just going, I'm 17 years old and I'm flying an airplane by myself. I mean, it was an amazing feeling. And I'll get back to why I didn't think about being a professional pilot, which will launch into your question, Shelley, is when I was flying in high school and when I was hanging out at the airport starting at the age of 12, 13, I never saw any women ever. When I was training for my pilot's license, there were no other female students. There were no instructors. There were no women in the tower. There were no women on the field. And in fact, when I got my pilot's license, the local news called me and they said, "You're a girl taking flying lessons. Can we come interview you?" I mean, that's how insanely novel it was.
Which this wasn't that long ago, right? I think that people
70s,
think
yeah.
that that's something that happened, a really long time ago. But
no, and here's what's crazy. So as I mentioned, and as you repeated, right now, the percentage of all pilots in the world that are women in the world are 6%. And the average in the US is about the same. And what's really pathetically sad is the percentage of women pilots in 1965 was 4%.
Mm.
So it's gone from 4% to 6. It's just not right. When I do professional speaking, which I do, one of the themes I use in my presentations, especially to young people, to young people as a lesson to them, and to adults as a lesson to them as well. My favorite quote ever that I always use was from Sally Ride, who most people know was the first US American woman in space in the 1980s. Sally Ride once said, "You can't be what you can't see." And it applies to me exactly. Here I was taking flying lessons at 17. Never occurred to me I could be a professional pilot because I never saw one, ever.
Right.
Never occurred to me I could be, traffic controller. Never saw a woman in the tower. I don't mind. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this as a point of the school system. I graduated third in my class of 750 seniors. I had a 4.3 GPA. I had scholarships being thrown at me like water. And never did a guidance counselor say, well, what do you want to do with it? Like, what do you want to study? Like, I had zero guidance. I had zero help. And with you can't be what you can't see, I had no role models either. So I had already been on a pre-med track. So when I mentioned earlier that I started college and quit, I started in pre-med, hated it, quit and joined the Air Force. And going through my whole career, whether it was in the military or as a civilian, the percentages of women in every organization I was in was really small. So there is a nonprofit called Women in Aviation International. It's WAI.org. And I've been a member, they've been around for 32 years now. I've been a member for, I think, 20 or 21 years. I've been chapter president in 2 other locations. And Women in Aviation, what's amazing about our organization is their mission is to inspire young girls and women of any age to not only get into aviation and now aerospace careers, but to find support for them along the way. So we do an enormous number of scholarships. Last year, we gave out, I think, 130-ish scholarships that totaled about $900,000.
Wow.
We just crossed, I think, 20 or 25 million total since the early 80s. But Women in Aviation provides mentoring, networking, education, seminars, scholarships to women who want to get into any of the aviation fields, aviation photography, aviation law, which most people don't even know is a career, like Day does, and of course, piloting. So when I moved here to Albuquerque 2 years ago, I went online to change my address and pick a new chapter. And I'm like, wow, there is not one in New Mexico. So I know the people at headquarters really well. So I called my buddy up there and I said, are you serious? There's not a chapter in the entire state of New Mexico? She's like, never has been in 30 years. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm starting one then. So I did start the chapter. I mean, as soon as I got settled here and got, things organized in my brain, made sure I had income, we started putting out feelers. And so officially November of 2019, we officially launched what we now call the Land of Enchantment chapter of Women in Aviation International. Website's wainewmexico.com. And I'm super, super proud of the team, the board of directors that we put together. I'll run through them real quickly just to give you an example of the variety of this career field. And what I'm super, super jazzed about is, starting a chapter is hard. You've got the whole getting everyone to understand why they would want to join, what we do, getting sponsorship, getting the whole 501c3 approval from the state, which is literally 14 steps that took me about 10 months to do. But I'm really proud of the fact that we went from 0, nothing, brand new chapter to about 55 members in a year, which is huge, by the way. And we landed 2 corporate sponsors almost right away. The first was sort of an under the table thing I knew was going to happen. I've had a professional relationship with someone at Virgin Galactic since I first moved here because I was going to do a project with them that didn't work out. But so Virgin Galactic started taking me to lunch and going, can you please make us a corporate sponsor? Which is Not usually how it goes. You're usually begging for sponsorship.
Right.
So Virgin Galactic was our first corporate sponsor. Not only is she an amazing human being, but Nika Allen, who's the director of aviation, of course, for the city and runs the airports here, she was able to get, without even telling me she was doing it in the background. So Albuquerque Sunport is our second corporate sponsor. But our board of directors, when I was president, which I'll get to in a minute, because I did step down recently to turn it over to someone else. So I'm founder and president. Our vice president is Jessie Rowden, who is the general manager of Qatar Aviation, the fixed base operator at the Sunport. She's been with Qatar 16 years. She's an amazing human being. She was nominated and awarded last year or the year before, as the National Business Aviation Association's one of the 40 under 40 award winners. If you haven't interviewed her, I would highly recommend it. She's amazing. Nika Allen is our secretary. We have an amazing treasurer named Alexis Pachicha, who actually works for Edward Jones by day, because I really wanted someone who could really help us manage finances properly. Gina Arnott is she's changed roles a couple times. What is she doing now? Gina runs social media for us, actually. She works as a senior aircraft appearance specialist for Alaska Airlines. And we have Day Hockman Vigil was on our board, and actually she and I both sort of stepped down because we're both too busy. But Day was on our board, one of my founding members and board members as well. And again, just to recap, Day is also, she's a state legislator, House of Representatives, District 15, but she's also the only aviation and space law certified attorney in the state of New Mexico. So we built an amazing team and ran it for a year. Of course, with COVID, it was challenging. And oh, by the way, getting 55 members during COVID.
Right. Yes. I want to say, like, what an accomplishment.
Yeah. And what's amazing,
our daughter has joined the organization. So
yes, she has. What's really miraculous about our success, not only that we got 55 members in a year, but we have never held a single meeting in person. Because right about our first huge meeting, which was going to be, Nika was going to let us use the old terminal building, which is super historic and wonderful. That was scheduled for the first week of May. So it never happened. And, we've been doing everything through Zoom. Now we've had amazing speakers and it's been going amazingly well, but to get that kind of traction with never having to meet in person, because normally what the chapter will do, so let's say COVID disappears in the fall, like we all hope, what WAI Land of Enchantment chapter will do for folks in the community here is, number one, we usually would hold chapter meetings with phenomenal guest speakers in person. Number two, we would be conducting tours of different companies and organizations throughout the state, which there are a lot of amazing companies here to go visit. We would be doing tours of the tower, of course, probably at the Sunport, courtesy of Nika, and offering scholarship programs. Now, we also will run local chapter member only scholarships, as well as usually we do a big annual scholarship through the WAI.org process. And flight training is a huge thing, just to swing back to the 6% thing. So one of the whole purposes of Women in Aviation International is to introduce opportunities to people, again, at any age. We tend to target young girls. There's been a lot of studies as to what age group to really focus on. So for example, one of the most amazing things about WAI is we do an annual event that started in 2015 called Girls in Aviation Day. It's every fall. This year, of course, 2020 was the first year. It was unfortunately virtual, but Girls in Aviation Day is they pick one day in the fall, and they try to get every chapter in the world to do something on the same day. And right now there's about 130 chapters around the world. There's about 14,000 members. So the only rules about Girls in Aviation Day is, number one, it really has to be girls. Sorry, but no boys allowed in this one. And number two is we target ages between usually 8 and 16. And number three is they like people to do, I'm going to call it a more complex event. So just doing a tour of the control tower does not qualify. It has to be educational. It has to be multifaceted. So I'll give you an example of my two most favorite events that I planned when I ran the San Diego chapter for 4 years. And they happened related to each other, and it's actually quite hilarious. So we had a big event. I'm actually going to do three real quick. My first ever event in San Diego We went to one of the places like a Cutter Aviation, a fixed base operator, it's called. We had a career panel of 9 women in completely different fields in aviation talk to the girls. We had about 50 girls attend and their parents. So a couple hundred people altogether. We had an education area where they emptied a hangar for me, and we put tables where anyone in San Diego who taught aviation of any kind came and had a table. FAA found out about it and asked if they could come and set up a table. A woman I know who's the only escape parachute designer for the US Navy came and had a table. It was really awesome. And then what we did the third hour is I had a really close relationship with the leadership at the Navy. There's a lot of Navy facilities there, Navy organizations in San Diego. And I got to be really good friends with the woman who at the time was the head of diversity for the Navy there. And she arranged for one of them. They don't fly here a lot in Albuquerque, but in San Diego, anytime you look up in the sky, there's normally what's called an H-60. It's one of those massive, massive, massive helicopters. It's called the H-60 Seahawk. So Captain Graham, who was the Navy officer I'm still friends with, Captain Graham arranged for an H-60 to come and land at a very small airport in San Diego. The kids got to hang around the helicopter, and they arranged for me on request to have an all-female crew. So this helicopter lands, the kids did not know it was coming. We made it a surprise. All girls jump out, and their eyes got real big and the parents' eyes got real big. And then the next January, I did a Happy New Year email to the whole chapter and said, this year Girls in Aviation Day happens to land the same day as the Miramar Air Show, which is the biggest Marine Corps base in the country. And the Blue Angels fly at Miramar every year. So I said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do something with the Blue Angels? I know it's a ridiculous thing to think about. And Captain Graham wrote me privately and said, well, they kind of work for me. What do you want? So we were able to, with a lot of begging and planning, arrange for less than 20. I was limited to 20 girls, so we had to do an essay contest to pick people. But after the Miramar Air Show that next year in 2016, we were able to ended up to be 17 girls and just a few of my board members out after the Blue Angels performed, and we got to meet them all, get the official photo in front of the jet. But what was really special about it, why I wanted to do it, Marine Corps at the time, Captain Katie Higgins was flying Fat Albert, their C-130 cargo plane, which also does maneuvers and is in part of the Blue Angels show. And she's the first ever female pilot for the Blue Angels, and they've still never let a woman fly the fighter jet, by the way. But she flew Fat Albert, so the kids got to hang out with her for like an hour. It was amazing. And then last year, in my sort of parting shot as chapter president, I was able, and I had wanted to do it for years, and finally was able to pull it together. We ended up raising almost $40,000 and hosted 200 girls on the USS Midway for an overnight aviation education program. So I worked for a year with the Midway Education Department, and they do overnight programs that you can just pay and go to. But I sat down with them and said, look, let's take your normal overnight program. I'm going to X off anything that does not relate to airplanes. I don't care if they see the kitchen. I don't care, put them back on the flight deck for another 20 minutes, So we ended up having a huge formal gala. I never thought we'd raise enough money because it cost me about almost $20,000 just to have the event on the Midway, because we wanted to target underprivileged kids. We didn't want the family to have to pay anything for this activity. Right. And one of my favorite parts about it, Shelley and Bob, is that there were a couple girls when they showed up at the ramp next to the USS Midway, seemed almost like they were told to come by their parents and didn't want to be there. We had some girls who didn't even look excited, and my staff and I would walk around and try to energize them, and they just really didn't seem to care. And I went and found those same girls while they waited for their parents to pick them up the next morning. And they were just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And, I could join the Navy and fly these airplanes. So that's what WAI is all about. It's providing that inspiration. Yes. It's providing that role model. In San Diego, what we did often, which we will definitely incorporate into the chapter here, is finding people in the chapter who have amazing careers. We have a woman in the chapter who has owned one of the balloon training, flight training companies for balloonists forever. I'd love to get her as a role model, to an elementary school to talk about being a balloon pilot. We have a military member who flies a very unique special aircraft out at Canada Air Force Base, who's a member who's phenomenal. So, getting all these amazing women who have such a variety of careers in front of young girls. Again, you can't be what you can't see.
Yes.
If you see a woman walk up in a Air Force flight suit and she tells you about, how she got to her career and what she does, and then we as WAI can provide scholarships and provide mentorships and help them. That's really what it's all about.
I love that. Such a powerful story, such an amazing mission. And we're just excited to hear about it and to share it. And I would encourage our listeners and our viewers to check out the WAI.org website, because even if you're not in California, there, like you said, it's a nationwide organization. There are things happening worldwide. Organization, and that's good because we have a lot of worldwide listeners.
Right.
Of our podcast. And so that's really, really important.
But I think there's also a very telling message here is that if a Jill Meyers doesn't come along, then there's no chapter. I mean, she talked about how aerospace is very popular here. I mean, even if they have small offices, aerospace, aviation, and yet New Mexico never had a chapter. And so it was Jill who came here and saw the void. And she came in, and just this astronomical growth in 1 year, and the impact she's having on New Mexico and young girls and women in that area of aviation. And it's exciting. So there are probably, we do have listeners around the world, and they may be in a place where there is no chapter, and there's an opportunity. There's lots of voids that need to be filled, but oftentimes I think people just sit back, well, somebody else will do it, and then that somebody else never does it. And it never gets filled.
Absolutely. And to be clear, you do not have to be a pilot to join WAI. You can
Not
be a
at all.
student. You can just be someone interested in aviation or interested in learning more about aviation. So that's really, really exciting.
And if you go to WAI.org, there's a link where you can look for existing chapters. You put in your location. And what's interesting too is, last time I checked, the percentage of WAI members worldwide who are associated with the chapter was 25% or less, because of what you stated. And thank you very much for your kind words, by the way. A lot of people don't even know to look for a chapter, or they look for one, there's none, and they say, oh, well, you can still get all the benefits of WAI as an organization without being in a chapter, but you don't, have that local community and local connectivity, which I think is super important. The other thing too, if anyone listening is in a location that they look up and there is not a chapter, there is phenomenal guidance available from WAI staff at the headquarters, which is in Ohio. There's a whole package of how to start a chapter from scratch. And I've actually mentored a couple folks who the headquarters folks would get a call from someone saying, I want to start a chapter. And they're like, well, call Jill Meyers because she's done it more than once. And again, it's not easy finding board members who are willing to give up their time, because again, it's all 100% volunteer to do this work. It is not easy. It is not easy at all.
We absolutely know that ourselves, running a nonprofit as well.
Yeah, but I will say that there's something about women in aviation, not the organization. There's something about women in aviation. It is a really unique group of people who will go to the ends of the earth to help each other. And I've never seen anything like it. And in fact, one of the things that I'm also involved in is promoting the Women Air Force Service Pilots, the WASP, who are women who flew in World War II, every single military aircraft that existed, which most people don't know about because it's not in our history books. And I ended up finding out about a film company in the LA area called the Red Door Films. The woman who owns it, named Mattia Carell, is an absolute powerhouse. And she's been working for years on developing a film, a dramatic mini-series for television, not a documentary. There's been a lot of documentaries about the WASP. But Mattia is trying to do like an 8 or 10 or whatever part miniseries about the WASP. He's been researching them for almost 30 years now.
Wow.
And I found out about them, and I helped them plan a fundraiser to raise money to make this film with actual real women from the WASP Corps who were still alive at the time, and also current day women. We did an amazing panel called The Greatest Generation Meets the Next Generation. And what was amazing though is they first wanted to do something really small, and then they discovered me and my passion. And they initially wanted a fundraiser like in someone's living room with 20 people, and I'm like, well, I think maybe I can do bigger if you want to do bigger. So I ended up planning an event at an airport in a hangar. We sold 170 tickets. It was this powerhouse event, and a lot of the people that helped us were, of course, volunteers. And I'll never forget Mattia being in the film industry her whole life. She also teaches university at a film school. She came up to me once and she said, "I've never seen anything like these women in aviation who will just drop everything, donate their time, donate their efforts." I had aircraft flown in on a donation, super expensive to fly an aircraft anywhere, even for a day with fuel prices. When I told people about it, I had some friends who owned historic World War II aircraft, and when I called them and said, bring your T6 over, they're like, sure. And Mattia had said, and I've had other people in other industries that I've collaborated with over the years say, I've never seen anything like the passion of your group. And I think part of it goes back to there aren't many of us. And if we don't stick together and don't support each other, whether it's something that's compensated or not, this community is super tight, super passionate, and will really do anything to help anyone who wants to get into aviation or aerospace. It's really, it's what I'm obviously the most excited about in life, and inspiring young girls who just really don't know what the possibilities are, and they're endless.
Yeah, definitely a passion project. And I love your vision for mentoring. I think it is so critical that we, that's part of the beauty of our podcast, is that we can highlight some amazing women like yourself and share with young women who are listeners and their parents and professionals, like just the importance of stepping in, becoming a mentor, and making a difference. So I know we've only unpacked a very small portion of your story, Jill. So but we're going to wrap things up. I just want to ask, you've got one other question you want to ask?
I do want to ask. So you started the consulting company, and I'm just kind of interested. Stuart was one of your clients. Who's your typical client?
I don't have a typical client because I will just say yes to anything awesome. So just two extremes real quick. I had a client in 2019 for a 6-month or so contract where a friend of mine recommended me for this contract, and it turned out that there's a high school in Aspen, Colorado, the Aspen High School, public high school, and they have a nonprofit flight school, which, by the way, is the only nonprofit flight school I've ever heard of in Aspen. And the head of the board of directors at the time of that flight school connected with me and said, hey, we have this idea. We want to start a program called Every Student Flies. And we heard that you did marketing and PR and media for Shasta Ways, and we really need someone to help us launch this program. So I got hired to do marketing and PR. Who would have ever dreamed that as an aerospace engineer? And what I did is I helped them finalize the details of the program and launch it. And what's been happening since the fall of 2019 is all 500-ish students at the Aspen High School, many, by the way, who are bused in from towns that don't have the wealth of Aspen. So yes, there's a need. Every single student at the Aspen High School gets a free flight lesson if they want to sign up, and a whole wad of education information after that flight's over as to how they can get into aviation careers. And we've had huge successes with it. So that was one of my contracts.
That's interesting. A previous interview that we have, long time ago interview, was with Mark Hyatt. He's up in Colorado and doing something very similar, not in Aspen, but he was up in the Denver area, outside of Denver, doing something very similar. Makes you, I know that we have some of those opportunities here in New Mexico, but throughout the Southwest, I think if people look for them, they are there. But so that was your first kind of range of clients. What was the second that you were going to tell us about?
My two new contracts are, I have a consulting contract with a nonprofit organization in Botswana in Africa, where the founder is one of the first women to fly for the Botswana Defense Force years ago. And she started a nonprofit about 10 years ago called Dare to Dream, where she works at what's called the Botswana Innovation Hub. They bring in girls and boys, they teach robotics and aviation and entrepreneurship and everything related to engineering and STEM. And the founder has asked me to come on board to help them plan and execute a month-long program, which we're now going to do in the summer of 2022 because of COVID, where her program has been in existence for 10 years, but has never extended past Botswana. And girls in Africa are very much second-class citizens, regardless of their accomplishments still to date.
Yes.
So we're going to get a hold of an aircraft, which is one of my roles, to find one that we hopefully don't have to pay for. We're going to take an aircraft and fly to 5 of the surrounding countries and have a one-day STEM event. And we call it STEAM. And by the way, they add an E to STEAM. So it's science, technology, engineering, arts, math, and entrepreneurship. And we are going to do one-day workshops with 100 young girls in each country. It's going to be Malawi, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, to get all of them experience to aircraft and STEM and STEAM and aviation and aerospace, and get hopefully some support to the girls in Africa. And then I have one brand new contract I've not even announced yet. This is the first time I'm announcing it, but there's a local company here in Albuquerque called Build with Robots. They have developed the robot called Breezy One that disinfects the Sunport every night.
Right.
They have just brought me on board a couple days ago to try to help them market that product at other airports around the United States. So I'll be helping them connect to other airport managers and help promote that within the aviation industry.
Excellent. One of our, well, we have 2 student alumni that are working with Chris Ziamek there at Build with Robots.
Wonderful.
And one of them actually helped to fabricate and build Breezy. So
fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm super psyched about that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, good for you. So wide range of opportunities, right? Wide range of things that you're doing.
And that I also wanted to ask Jill about what she's doing, because we may have members in our audience that don't even know that Jill exists and the service she can provide, and they may want to reach out to her.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well,
so,
thank you. Thank
so
you.
On that note, Jill, how do people reach out and learn more about you? How does our audience support you?
Well, thank you. I guess the best way is if you go to my website, which is meyersaero.biz, meyersaero.biz. You can connect with me through the website. Okay. And also on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And yes. And then if you would look into the local WAI chapter, again, it's wainewmexico.com. And if you want to join or just share the information, if you would like to donate to support the finances of the chapter, that'd be great too. But those are the best way to get a hold of me is through my website. And you can also my bio on there. You can read about my speaking career and my consulting career, both on meyersaero.biz. And thank you very much, both of you.
Well, we're thrilled that you could be our guest today. You're so accomplished. It's so important for us to, our young women out there, to have great role models like yourself. And
thank you.
It's important for us, the nonprofits of the world, to support one another and be passionate. And certainly, like I said, we have a lot of young women that are interested in aviation. So I think it's important to reach out and share more about that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hey there, this is Shelley, and I am so glad that you have stopped by STEM Southwest. Can I ask a favor? If you've gotten some value out of our episodes, if you are just powered by nerd power and are excited about what we're doing, or if you're new to us and you've got just an interest, subscribe now and help us grow by doing that. Then take a moment and give us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast player, because we could use your support and help. We are trying to raise up an army of STEM Southwest supporters. And then last, think about sharing our podcast with your friends, your families, or even complete STEM strangers, because, it's all about making the world a better place and having more STEM rock stars highlighted and connected. Stop by our website if you're looking for resources, and you're going to find a lot of things that's going to grow over time. So continue to stop on in and join us. Subscribe now and support STEMSW.com.
You've been listening to the STEM Southwest podcast. Nerd on, fellow STEM nerds.